Javier Becerra, Chairman of the House Democratic Caucus, joined by our Vice Chairman from New York, Joe Crowley. We had a good discussion with our members coming back, hoping that this week might have been a week where we would have actually started to do the business that the people of this country are interested in having Congress take on. And that's, of course, keeping the good news about 288,000 jobs created in April moving forward. Creating those jobs that Americans want to see so they can feel real comfortable that the middle class is not just a dream for some, but that it will be a reality for all. And we would hope that in the months that we have left, maybe the Republican leadership would have given us a chance to focus on that job creation. But once again, this week we will have not one vote on a jobs agenda. We won't have one vote on fixing our broken immigration system. We won't have one vote to finally extend emergency unemployment insurance for more than 2 million Americans who have lost their job through no fault of their own. We will not have one vote to try to provide women who work just as hard as their male counterparts equal pay for that same work. What it appears we will have is a lot of distraction on the floor, a lot of very partisan votes on a number of processes that are extremely partisan. Some would actually call them sessions that lead to inquisitions that harken back to the days of the McCarthy era. Either way, I don't think the American public cares a whole lot except to say that they want us to get to the real business of this country, and that is keeping Americans employed and moving up to better jobs so they can send their kids to college, make sure they have a secure place to live, and have opportunity the way previous generations have been able to secure for their kids. We're not sure where we're going to head on any number of issues, but I can tell you that on the floor this week, we will have a bill that will increase the deficit by over $150 billion. And it's being proposed by the same people who have said that they are fiscal conservatives. It appears more like we have fiscal pretenders who are putting a bill on the floor on a subject matter which most people would agree on, including whether you're Democrat or Republican, we could agree on, and that is to help our companies move forward with their research and development so that they are inventing the new products of tomorrow. They're keeping ahead of the competition abroad and therefore creating more jobs here at home. But when we hear Republicans talk about being fiscally responsible, we think that they would require that any legislation they put on the floor not increase the size of our national deficit. Unfortunately, what we see this week is a bill that will not only increase the deficit but blow a hole in it. And if they continue on this path with the bills that they have in line on this matter, on tax breaks, we're talking about a $300 billion plus hole in the deficit that will be created by the Republican legislation, by these fiscal pretenders. And so what we hope is we have responsibility that will govern the day on the floor of the House, that we will have bills on the floor that lead to a jobs agenda that will help Americans get back to work, and that we will have a process that is not only bipartisan, but is balanced and lets us, for the American people, move forward the most important issues and decisions for this country. But unfortunately, it looks like this week will be a week of not only partisan chaos, but it looks like we're seeing lived out on the floor of the House the internal civil war that we've seen ongoing in the Republican conference in the House of Representatives for quite some time, and that is the disagreement between their far right, the Tea Party, and their right on where to go and how to where to take this country. And we're watching this play out on the floor of the House in so many different ways. It's time to get to the business of the American people, and that is creating jobs, keeping people ready to buy a house, send their kids to college. We'd like to get to that work, and we hope our Republican colleagues will join us. With that, let me turn to Vice Chairman Crowley.
Thank you, Chairman Becerra. Let me just join you in your frustration. I'm frustrated. I think the members of the Democratic Caucus are also very frustrated that once again we find ourselves getting bogged down here, unfortunately, in partisan issues, as opposed to really focusing what the American people want us to focus on. That is on job creation, that is on passage of unemployment insurance for the millions, almost 3 million Americans who have gone without that since December of last year who are struggling to make ends meet. And they look at Congress and they just scratch their heads and wonder what is going on. And the ratcheting up of partisanship, this is not the time for that. It's about getting things accomplished. We have an immigration bill that has been floundering here in the House of Representatives. The Senate has done their work. And instead of focusing on a hearing on immigration reform and getting a bill to the floor, we're focused, the House Republicans are now focused on the creation of a new select committee. To me, it's just outrageous. And I hope they start to hear from the constituents and from the American people to stop the games and the circus and start to get things done. On the issue of the tax bill before us, the R&D tax extender, I share the concerns that my colleague from California has stated. We have been trying to pass an unemployment insurance extender that will pair in comparison in terms of the cost of a $150 billion bill that's before us today. I think both the chairman and myself agree that we need to extend our R&D tax credits. It does help create innovation in our country and find the next new technology. And at the same time, the way in which the Republicans are going about this is fiscally unresponsible. No pay for at all. They require a pay for unemployment insurance, but no pay for this one particular tax expenditure. And there are 5 others that they're proposing as well, ignoring the 50 other or so tax expenditures that we have yet to address. So we're really about political gamesmanship, and unfortunately here today the Republicans are, and not about getting anything really accomplished, and that's unfortunate for the American people.
Well, the leadership, with Leader Pelosi helping draft the letter, has sent correspondence to our Republican colleagues in the House Republican leadership, asking them to outline exactly how they propose to have this select committee on Benghazi operate. The signs have been distressing that it won't be balanced, that this will be a partisan endeavor, that full power will vest in one person, the chairman, that the length of the select committee's life is indeterminate, could go on forever. The amount of money that they could spend is undefined and could be unlimited. And so it's a very disconcerting matter to learn this from our Republican colleagues. We're hoping to get more clarification. But I will tell you, after 2 years, 13 hearings, 50 briefings, 8 reports, 25,000 pages of documents, and millions of taxpayer dollars spent on the issue of Benghazi, it looks like Republicans are more concerned about an email than they are about the 4 Americans who lost their lives. And so what we hope is that our Republican colleagues will explain to us what more we expect to get out of another committee process and how it will be done in a balanced way so that the American people understand that we have to be distracted by something rather than focus on creating jobs for the American people.
Mr. Chairman, can you talk for a minute about how this would, and again, I know there was a lot of debate. I talked to probably a dozen members who walked out of the caucus. One of the arguments for and arguments against. Can you lay out in concrete terms that this is going to be a caucus decision? What it's going to look like if Democrats don't participate, if you have Hillary Clinton and Susan Rice being called without Democrats to help run the air cover for it, or if you do participate, and if some Democrats say, well, that adds to legitimacy. Can you walk us through these 2 scenarios?
There are 4 committees that are investigating Benghazi. I see no reason to break up all the work that's been done and to take months and months and months to create some select committee. That's my sentiment. But it's just not my sentiment. Those are actually the words of Speaker John Boehner, Republican Speaker John Boehner. I have just quoted to you what John Boehner said just a few weeks ago. I agree with John Boehner, at least that John Boehner, before he flip-flopped and became the new John Boehner. And it's become very difficult to know who we can trust on the Republican side in the House because the leadership continues to flip-flop. They say they're for immigration reform, then they don't do anything. They say they're going to come up with Republican immigration principles, then they shout them and shut them down. On the whole issue of Benghazi, Speaker John Boehner says, why are we going here? The chairman of the Armed Services Committee, Buck McKeon, says, we've investigated this as much as you can investigate. Why do we need to do more? I'll quote you directly. At some point, when we run out of people to talk to, or we run out of people to talk to 2 or 3 times, at some point, we think we'll have as much of this story as we're going to get and move on. That was Chairman Buck McKeon on April the 10th, less than a month ago, the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. So I think I would associate myself with the remarks of then Chairman Buck McKeon and then Speaker John Boehner. Again, if they're going to flip-flop and come up with something different because of this internal civil war that's going on among Republicans in the House, that's something different. But that doesn't take us any closer to doing the things that are most important to the American people, and that's talking about jobs and having a jobs agenda, not about regurgitating investigations of something that's been investigated over and over and over. So our concern is that this is nothing more than a kangaroo court in the making. They have not explained to us on the Republican side what's so important to do this over and over again, in contrast to the words of just a couple of weeks ago, a few weeks ago, of the Speaker himself and the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, which investigated this as well. I don't know if my
Yeah, I just would make a couple of points. One is, from what I've seen so far, there's no indication that the Select Committee will act any differently than the Government Oversight Committee and the authority that they have already today. What this really, I think one of the stories that may be being missed right now is that this is the full neutering of Chairman Issa and his 16 months of work, for one thing. But nothing new will come of this. Nothing new. And I think, as the chairman has mentioned before, that the American people are tired of this. There was a tragic event that took place. The State Department, the CIA, and Defense Department are taking steps to ensure that something like this doesn't happen again. But the notion or idea that our president, our former Secretary of State, or our present Secretary of State, or anyone in the State Department wanted this to happen, in my opinion, is outrageous, and wouldn't have taken every step, as the former Secretary of State said, every step to try to prevent this from happening. Many of us knew the ambassador, as did the Secretary of State. So this event, these investigations, these hearings over and over again, when the Speaker has indicated that it's already been vetted through. And the other point I want to make is, what about the families of these victims as well? What assurances can the Speaker give to these families that this will not become, once again, a political charade and a circus that far too many of these investigative committees have become? Overly politicized, overly partisan, without any regard for the families and the victims and the families themselves and their memories. They served this country as heroes, and now are being used as political tools to move a political agenda. And that is just unacceptable, and it needs to end.
So will you boycott it or not? If it's a charade, a kangaroo court of circus?
Our leader and our minority whip have sent a letter, both Leader Pelosi and Whip Hoyer, to the Speaker, asking him and the Republican majority to, if they're moving forward with this, to create a select committee like we have with the Ethics Committee and others, to an even split between Democrat and Republican, that we have the ability to depose the witnesses before they come to the committee, allowing for fairness in terms of requiring a majority in order to subpoena individuals. We're asking for very simple and really mundane things in the overall course of things. And well, we're saying we'll wait and hear what the Speaker, what the response is before we'll make it. Before we will announce what we'll do.
I need to press on this.
Let me go to someone new, and then we'll get back to you if we have a chance.
It's not going to happen, that this is basically past committee, that they're not going to make any changes. So if they're saying no to your request,
We haven't seen that. We have a letter. We have written a letter. We'll wait for a written response from the Speaker's office, and we in the leadership, in consultation with our members, will make a decision going forward as to how we'll deal with this. In response to the 7-5 split, that's not that is a partisan committee. That is not a bipartisan committee, and we're talking about a select committee like we have in the Ethics Committee. And these are very serious. This is a serious issue. As I said before, a tragic event took place. It has been fully vetted by several committees here in the House and in the Senate, as the State Department has done investigations as well. And going back to my previous statement, if anyone believes that any American in the State Department, that our Secretary of State wanted this to happen, or that somehow the President wanted this to happen, this is all about an email or emails, as opposed to when people knew, what they knew, or how they knew what took place, as opposed to the fact that this did happen and that Americans were killed, is outrageous. We should find ways to prevent this from happening again. That's legitimate, and I think, as I said before, the departments are moving towards making those changes. They have already. But to suggest somehow that Americans wanted Americans to be killed is just outrageous.
If I could just add, our Republican colleagues in House Republican leadership never reached out to the nearly half of the members of Congress on the Democratic side to discuss doing yet another hearing and investigation on the incident in Benghazi. When our leadership put out a letter asking the Republican leadership if we could make sure that if they're going to move forward with a process of investigating again Benghazi, that it be done in a fair and balanced manner, we're hoping to get a formal response back. If the Republicans decide they don't want to have a fair and balanced process in doing yet another investigation on Benghazi, then we'll have to weigh that when we get their word back. But we're just hoping that they will agree that the process should be fair and balanced if it truly is to be transparent and to try to uncover maybe something new that was not there. But right now, I think Speaker Boehner's previous words of just a few weeks ago speak for themselves. And we're hoping that there will be a process that will be fair and balanced. But again, it's up to the Republicans to decide if they wish to have a fair and balanced process or not. Other questions? Mike?
Can I just do just one point? You mentioned there was a Trey Gowdy. Is that who you mentioned? So the letter that was written by our leadership was to the Speaker of the House, who created or is creating the Select Committee. I don't know under what authority Mr. Gowdy has to make a statement. I'm not as familiar with Mr. Gowdy as I am the Speaker of the House. I've heard that, and that's, quite frankly, with all due respect to the gentleman, I don't know much about him at all. Quite frankly, I do know who the Speaker is, and we'll wait for the Speaker's response to the letter from the leadership.
Mike.
Do you anticipate any Democratic support for the creation of the committee, and how much would that weigh into your decision whether or not to boycott?
Again, I think we as Democrats are, given that we were not consulted, no one reached out to us on the Republican side to say, hey, let's do a ninth report on Benghazi. Let's do a fourth or fifth committee investigation on Benghazi. Let's see if we can round up the same 25,000 documents again and pages of documents again. They didn't reach out to us. The Republicans didn't reach out to us because we expected that Speaker Boehner was true to his word. I mean, it's difficult to know how to have confidence in what the Speaker says as he runs the House if one day he says something and the next day he's going to say something else. So where we will go as members of Congress on the Democratic side, it just depends on where Republicans decide to go. If they want to have a fair and balanced approach, I think we'll take a look at that openly. But if they're going to have a partisan, closed, untransparent process, you have to wonder what the value is, especially since it's using up millions of taxpayers' dollars and a lot of precious time when we don't have a lot of time left in this year to try to really get to the thing most important to the American public, and that getting back to job creation.
But you've seen the bill that's going to be on the floor tomorrow, and you've heard comments from your caucus this morning. Has anybody said that they're going to vote for it?
Well, and we looked at the bill, but Mike, can you tell me how much we're going to spend on this another Benghazi investigation? Can you tell us when, Mike, based on this bill, this new Benghazi Select Committee will end? It's totally open-ended. I think we're all interested in always getting to the truth, but I'm not sure if they're interested in necessarily getting to the truth in this case. It looks like they just want another issue for their far right. Again, I don't see how you square Speaker Boehner's words today with Speaker Boehner's words 3 weeks ago.
Has the White House weighed in with you, whether they want you to participate or not?
I have not spoken to the White House on this. I don't know if the White House has spoken to anyone, but again, this is something that popped up over the weekend when John Boehner started talking about doing another hearing on this. And so it's one of those things where this seems to have surfaced within the Republican ranks, those who are not happy with the Speaker's previous words, who apparently were not happy when they heard their own Republican chairman say, we've done this enough, let's move on. And again, just as we saw with the Republican shutdown of government last year because they wanted to, in their obsession, kill the Affordable Care Act, it seems like once again, with this obsession that Republicans have of zeroing in on these things, that they have now forced their own Republican leadership to empanel a very partisan process to try to investigate what's already been investigated. We'll find out a little bit more, but again, it's still very unclear where the Speaker intends to go. And I guess the Speaker, his flip-flop from a few weeks ago, who knows, maybe he'll flip-flop again.
What's this like if, again, if you do participate, what the optics are, what it's like if you don't participate?
Yeah, now I'll let Joe respond as well. We keep wondering when we're going to get to the things that are priorities. We've got a bill waiting to go that would fix a broken immigration system that would help create jobs, reduce our national deficit, increase economic output, and finally give us certainty on the borders. That bill is ready to go because the Senate already did it. There's a House version. We know we have the votes to pass it. But we get no answer from Republicans on when the House will do its work and let us have a vote. We have nearly all the votes we need to finally extend emergency unemployment insurance to Americans who've lost their job through no fault of their own, close to 3 million. That bill's ready to go, could be on the floor today, but once again, we get no word from our Republican leaders in the House what they'll do on that bill. So that sits again, and millions of Americans are left in the cold. We have no word yet from Republicans when they'll finally put up a jobs agenda. The president has made a number of proposals that would help stimulate job creation immediately, that would help fix our roads and our bridges and repair our schools, that would put a lot of construction workers who lost their jobs through the 2008 recession right away. We can't get Republicans to put those bills on the floor. That's really what we would love to see. Instead, we're hearing the news that Republicans want to re-engage on something the Speaker himself said no need to re-engage on. How we respond to that, it's tough because when they say they want to re-engage on something that 3 weeks ago they said they don't need to engage in, they don't ask us, they don't inform us, they just sort of let it pop up on the news and say they're going to do this. Then they put on the floor a bill that is very vague and ambiguous about how they'll do this process, with no limit on how much money they might spend, no limit on how much time they might take, no sense that it'll be fair or balanced. And so when you ask members of Congress who've been elected to serve the people where we stand on that, gosh, we know what the priorities of the American people are. Job creation, giving people a sense of economic security and health security. Do we need to rehash the incident in Benghazi? Well, the family members of our ambassador and the 3 others who died will tell you they don't want this to be politicized. And I think many of us fear that that's exactly what the Republicans are doing in the House. They're politicizing this process for no gain for anyone, and certainly not the families of the victims in Benghazi, and certainly not to help us create more jobs. So, Joe?
I take it that's the last question?
We'll take that as the last question.
Let me give you some insight as to what happens within that closed-door meeting of the leadership. every meeting that we have, we put the interests of the American people first and foremost above politics. And don't be surprised, in this case, we're doing the exact same thing. We'll appropriately respond to the written response of the Speaker when he makes that response. That's what the Democratic leadership and the Democratic caucus will do.
Thanks all very much.